to talk today about Jamaica Bay specifically, and it's located in Brooklyn and Queens in New York City, which is part of Long Island. I know a lot of people don't think so, but in Brooklyn and Queens, geographically part of Long Island, and Jamaica Bay also touches into Nassau County a little bit. So, but this is what it looked like over 100 years ago, in the 1800s sometime. I don't have the exact date of this, but you can see here's the central part of the bay. All these big freshwater wetlands coming into streams, draining into the estuary. We know the estuary is a mix of fresh and salt water. Here's the Rockaway Peninsula, the westernmost barrier island on Long Island. And Brooklyn over here and Queens over there. So you'll see what once was a huge estuary of over 25,000 acres, and all of this was salt marsh up here and all out here. Most of it has been drained and filled in. So as a naturalist growing up in New York City, in Queens, on Jamaica Bay, I'd say it's one of the best places and worst places to be a naturalist, because you see the best and worst of what's happening. This is the New York Harbor. This is an infrared photograph, and this was taken back in probably the 70s, late 70s. You can see the harbor coming in here to Manhattan. Staten Island over here. The areas of red are areas of dense vegetation. So here we have New Jersey, heavily treed. Sandy Hook, the holly forest here. South New Jersey, called the Blue Belt down there, low-lying areas. And the central part of New Jersey, which is the Green Belt, which is Staten Island. And this is all Staten Island. Brooklyn and Queens, heavily urbanized. And except for, you can see a couple of parks here, Prospect Park, and you can see the lake, and Greenwood Cemetery. I found that growing up in Queens. Cemeteries were a great place to observe birds and other wildlife. And Jamaica Bay, you can see now all those streams have been straightened, and everything's been developed, seawalled, all the rockaways all seawalled or bulkheaded. Kennedy Airport filled in 4,500 acres of salt marsh, something today you just wouldn't even think of doing, right? And what's left of the bay, some of the edge marshes, and some of the central marshes in the bay here. A little closer look. Here's Kennedy Airport. There's a runway going out, abutting. Perhaps the biggest and best marshes in the bay, Joco and Silver Hole Marsh here, this marsh complex. The Rockaway is becoming heavily urbanized again. And the subway line feeder, which is an old Long Island Railroad line, actually feeding the Rockaways, so the New York City subway system does go out. But right now, due to Hurricane Sandy, it was breached in 3 places. So water came from the bay, and this is one of the ponds of the bay. It's a long history of disturbance and development and interesting things that happened back in Moses' time, where they created this so-called refuge, even though it was a de facto refuge for thousands of years. But they consulted with the Fish and Wildlife Service, who said, well, create these impoundments, for ducks and geese, waterfowl. That's what they were interested in at the time. So here you have the East Pond and the West Pond. So now there were 3 big openings here, and you saw, if you saw Russ Burke's program, 100-foot channel going into the West Pond, which is now no longer salt or brackish. I mean, it is salt water now. It's not fresh water. The Broad Channel community, a little enclave, it's where I live. During Hurricane Sandy, it was basically a lake. So we lost quite a bit of houses on this side. And the western section of the bay, which you can see all the development around the bay. The bulkheading and the Rockaways down here. And on the North Shore, Canarsie Pier, this is Brooklyn. 2 large landfill areas here, Fountain in Pennsylvania Avenue landfill, Spring Creek landfill, this is Howard Beach here. And again, the refuge, and some of the big marshes. So this photograph was about 1979. Most of these marshes have severely eroded now. This is out in the Rockaways. One interesting program that was started by New York City Audubon and the Trust for Public Land, it was was they noticed that land around the bay was getting snapped up, and so they did a survey, looked at all the remaining natural land around the bay and gave it a score, valued it according to its natural values, and then tried to get it transferred over into a protective agency. Like most of it was city land slated for development. The city and the local community board wanted to turn this peninsula into a truck body customizing plant. I said, it's ridiculous at this point. Everything's so developed. All we have is little bits and pieces. There's a nice little lovely peninsula with some nice growing woodlands, and there's a little coastal vegetation in there. Developing, this was all bulkheaded at one time, and the bulkhead eroded. Now we have salt marshes developing around the edge. So given a chance, nature will come back. So we did get the city to agree, and the Parks Department took it. And Henry Stern was the Parks Commissioner at the time. And he was really proactive in getting these lands, even though they weren't your traditional city parks with swings and things or ball fields. These were just natural buffers. So the program was called Buffer the Bay. And Henry came in a little motorboat with battle fatigues and a helmet. And they got off over here. We had a little dais up here. And he got out and he stuck the park flag. And he said, I claim this land as part of New York City's Emerald Empire. So he was a character, but he really did a lot to promote this program. This is the biggest marsh I mentioned out in the eastern section of the bay, abuts Kennedy Airport. And as you can imagine, and you all know about the incidents in the Hudson and the culling of the geese in the bay and all that, where they can talk about it a little bit. I took this from a helicopter. We were studying laughing gulls. In 1978, we found the first nesting pair of laughing gulls in New York State. And everyone was excited. The state DEC was excited, all the naturalists. By 1990, we had 7,500 nesting pair over here. So it became a real issue with the airport. And it's, salt marshes have high marsh and low marsh. Most of the rest of the bay now has been subsiding or with sea level rise. So most of the marshes are spartina, alterniflora, or the low marsh. But that marsh abutting the airport is the biggest and best, and that has some nice spartina patents, the higher marsh, which gets flooded less frequently. But what's been happening is that combination of sea level rise, the fact that the whole area has been channelized around the bay, and probably not enough sediment washing off the mainland into the marshes to help them keep up with sea level rise. And also more frequent storms, greater intensity of storms, working on the edges of the marshes, something called marsh dieback that we really figured was due to too much nitrogen coming out of even though we have 4 treatment plants around the bay, that in the dewatering process, create the sludge, that nitrogen-rich water, we would get like 40,000 pounds of nitrogen coming out. So that was, we felt, was really killing the root systems. Too much of a good thing. A little bit of nitrogen is good. A little bit of sewage is okay. But when you have such a large urban population and shrinking marsh area, you're going to have that kind of problem. So what we did was we got the city now is in the mode, and there's what happens too, just breaking out. This is an aerial photograph of what happens when the marsh starts to fragment. And as you get more and more edge, it starts to accelerate. So you have that problem. This one was, I don't know if I have photographs, but the first marsh that we worked on was this one. This is Broad Channel, the south end. And you can see the erosion here, tremendous erosion and the fragmentation. Well, they brought in a small dredge barge that could spray sediment on. Usually they would get these clamshell barges and clump it on. But we wanted to spray it on and bring the elevation up so it was just high enough so we could replant it with spartina. And we had a lot of volunteer help and with the Park Service. Planted all that, and it took. So the marshes that marsh is pretty much, it's not as good as the original marsh, of course, but it's at least a functional marsh. And we've been doing that to several marshes around the bay now. And I was just out there recently. We had 2 new sand islands put out there. Next year we're going to plant those. This is Plum Beach, and that's the Bell Parkway over here in Brooklyn. And it had been eroding into the parkway. So the Corps of Engineers, who routinely, clears out the channels, would dredge out the inlet and take that good sand and put it to good use. In this case, they put it up on Plum Beach, and then it was planted with beach grass, the Ammophila grass, to hold it in place. So again, we had a nice little beach, and 10 years later, we're back to square one. So this is what's happening everywhere. So now the Corps of Engineers is not only putting sand back on it as I speak, but they're going to put a couple of groins to hold it in place because it had been moving and actually filling in a marsh east of there. Again, the problem in the whole Bay Area is here's one of the creeks. This is one of the more natural-looking creeks called Fresh Creek. And part of the buffer of the bay, we got this land protected here. It's a city park. This was sold to development. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that. This is salt marsh, so it can't be developed now. And it's got this little meander here, somewhat natural. All that green water is the first flush. After any storm, because New York City's water system is one huge pipe which has not only sewage, but all the road runoff. So it all comes into one pipe, goes to the treatment plant, and even in less than a quarter inch of rain will fill up that whole treatment plant. They have to shut down. Everything goes out untreated. So that had been an issue. So the city DEP, we got them to agree to upgrade all 4 treatment plants around the bay to gradually take the nitrogen out. So they feel in the next 10 years with the upgrades, we'll capture maybe at least 50% more of the nitrogen coming out through a carbon filtration process. And that should help the marshes grow again, we hope. So those are the issues. And of course, that all that nutrient fuels all the growth. This is the ulva or sea lettuce, covering the whole mudflat, and the mudflat is really a habitat, and it's killing off whatever's underneath there. And when that all dies off and the bacteria feed on that and they eat up the oxygen, you end up with fish kills. These are menhaden, or bunker they're called. A lot of people use it as bait fish or for their crab traps or whatever. They used to be commercially, and probably still is, as fertilizer. Those of you who take the omega pills, fish oil, stop taking them because you're supporting an industry that's sucking up all the menhaden off the coast. And this is perhaps one of the most important fish in the whole estuary. Feeds everything else, including the ospreys that we love. And part of the whole restoration, there's a lot of things happening at once. One of the things is to bring back the oyster. So we couldn't find any of the original oysters, or some people said they might have recently found a couple. So bringing oysters in from across the other side of the bay, which I think is the same oyster. It can't be that genetically different. And at this point, does it really matter? We're bringing the oysters back in, and they're great at filtering out some of the pollutant as well. So that's ongoing. One of the projects we have in the bay is removing a lot of the abandoned boats around the bay that are smothering marsh areas. The gulls like this one, though. As you can see, this is years and years of gulls learning that you drop it on that place, it breaks. You drop it over there, it doesn't. So the gulls that survive learn to drop it on the hard substrates. Mostly herring gulls do that. We have a lot of those. Another look at that marsh. This is the Plum Beach, the other end of it. There's a lovely little marsh there. This is the Bell Parkway, this little beachfront here. And this lovely little salt marsh here was getting inundated with all kinds of boats and debris. So we had a big program. We got a lot of help. Various groups over the last dozen years or more pulled all that stuff out, and it's a lovely little marsh now. This debris field was removed. These are volunteers from Bloomberg Company. We got a lot of different corporate sponsors that bring people in, send volunteers. And one group, this is heavy equipment from the city, DEP. And this group is this is a group of youngsters from the Church of God. I found that these religious groups really come out in great numbers. We'd ask for a little help. They'd bring 300 people. And I'd see a huge dock, and I'd say, no. I said, we'll get heavy equipment in. They said, nope, we're going to do it. And they pulled out boats, whole boats. These kids, and they'd worked in the pouring rain last Earth Day, 4 hours, nonstop, happy as a clam. Something to be said for religion, isn't there? This is a barge that some guy dumped into one of the creeks and thought he just, we're going to dump it here and get away with it. But we managed to get the DEC, to their credit, to locate the owner, got it out, fined him, made him restore the site. There's all the sorts of craziness that goes on. And in between that, we try to educate and get all the school kids involved in all these programs. These shoreline cleanups are becoming very popular. We've been doing them since 1986. We started with 4 beaches in New York City. We have over 300 beaches statewide that we clean up once a year to document at least. But that spawned other groups. Everybody wants to come out and clean a beach. Something you can do, something visibly that you can do to help your neighborhood or the environment. Trash there, trash removed, looks good. Another issue was we've got a new group of another religion, the Hindus, and they come down to the water's edge and they have their ceremonies, and they were leaving all kinds of debris there, coconuts and incense pots and prayer flags and tinfoil. So we met with the religious leaders, and got that cut back pretty much. It's not as bad as this anymore, but it still goes around. Try to get them to pull out what they put in. A lot of people find a coconut around they say, well, is this global warming? I said, no, it's the Hindus. And they're lovely people. They don't kill anything, like to kill anything, and they do like to, but they have to, as part of their religion, come down to the water's edge during their holidays. Of course, the Canada geese, I've got pictures of Canada geese eating coconuts, and even brant geese chewing on coconuts. Species are changing their habitats there. This is a derelict boatyard. One of the marina operators just would dump stuff, in the marshes and the water's edge. So he finally got the city, after 20 years of litigation back and forth and so on, got the guy, kicked him off. New York City Sanitation Department came, and they took over 250 boats out of there. Like I said, whoa. And this Hurricane Sandy, New York City Sanitation, every day, it's been out there. I had to clean out my house. I had piles, 15 foot high of all kinds of debris I had to rip out of my house. Next day, it's gone. They've been really terrific. But anyway, that's a new city park. So that was given to city parks again. Gradually, we're going to work with the DEC to restore some of the marshes in there. So this is, again, meanwhile, back at the airport, there's your laughing gulls. Nice little birds. I love them. They're great flying birds. They catch insects in the air. For years, and I would meet every year with the Port Authority, FAA, and all the different agencies. We'd meet in the spring and fall and try to come up with plans to make the airport less attractive to the birds and so on. But they were really concerned, laughing gulls. And I said, I don't think so. Laughing gulls, if anyone's going to get out of the way of a plane, it's a laughing gull. They're such adroit flyers. But herring gulls, mute swans, cormorants, the bigger birds, Canada geese, and we found out, yes, those are the real culprits, if you want to call them culprits. Can't blame the birds, they're trying to get along. But, so as I said, 7,500 nesting pair, so we had to reduce the population. This is telephoto lens, it's not as close as it looks. I don't want to scare you from taking off at Kennedy Airport. But Canada geese, as we know, the incident in the Hudson, although those weren't your basic Canada geese from around the bay because they never get up over 100 feet. They don't have to. And these came from Westchester. They were migrating. They were at 2,000 feet. So I knew they were other birds. But that doesn't matter. Be what it may, we all agreed that, yes, there were too many Canada geese around. And if you're going to cull them, it's fine. I eat chicken and I eat those cute little lambs. So can I complain about them killing a Canada goose and giving the meat to a food bank? So once they had an end result of it, it kind of took the argument away. But, but we're trying to have a sensible management plan. You don't want to wipe out a species. I'm concerned that our next little goose is going to create a problem. The brant geese, our little winter goose here on Long Island, lovely little goose, comes down in pretty good numbers in the bay. And again, other birds that really don't get into problem with aircraft, the herons, egrets, ibises, and so on, they have no reason to go across the airport. So we had a bunch of studies. One of them said, well, if you grow the grasses in the infield next to the runways over 7, 8 inches in the summertime, the gulls won't roost there. They can't see. They're nervous. They don't roost there in great numbers. So that helped a lot. They killed some of the insects. They filled in some of the wetlands. They closed down some of the concessions that were feeding pigeons. So we brought the strike curve of birds down to a reasonable level. Snow geese never leave the bay. They come in. Unfortunately, they eat the Spartina, which we're not happy about. But we never have too many. We have maybe about 500, at most 1,000 I've counted over the years. But they'll hammer the Spartina, but they don't go into the other areas. The other birds, Canada geese, all the brake geese, feed now all around the edge of the bay. They learned to eat turf grass after 1978. We had a major freeze here. Froze, the whole bay was solid. The birds that survived learned to eat off the estuary. One thing the airport did, they brought in falconers. And I was there the first day. They were showing us, demonstrating. And they had, this is a peregrine, cross between a peregrine and a gyrfalcon. And they were flying it along the runways. And there were some gulls down the end. And they took off and they flew maybe 100 yards and landed. I said, those gulls aren't overly impressed by this bird, you know. A great black-backed gull can handle his own with this bird, and I think. Anyway, the next thing I know, a wild peregrine from the refuge came out of the blue, bolted and chased this bird clear off the airport. I said, I don't know about this program. But they touted it in the paper. They said, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. We're going to keep all the birds off. Once you say that, you can't stop the program. You stop it, you have an accident, you know what the results will be. So for years they did, but we did have some educational value of flying these peregrines and birds long runways, chasing them away. Interesting, the airport is great habitat. I would say to them, why don't we trade the refuge for let's make the airport the wildlife refuge. Because we had a lot of the open species, upland sandpiper, grasshopper sparrows, things like that, which we didn't have at the refuge. Some of the rarest species, including western jackrabbit that is thriving out there, still to this day. I don't know how they got there, but there's all kinds of crazy. Snowy owls love airports, so a lot of interesting birds. And you can see the trouble when birds hit those rotators and you start a chain reaction. So it doesn't take too much. You know, one goose hitting a bird plane taking off could do a lot of damage. A flock of starlings. Starlings are densely, a lot of it has to do with the density of the bird. So starlings are densely packed little birds. They hit, a flock of them can have a problem. So we still have a lot of problems. You'll never make the skies completely safe. There's always going to be, especially when you have an airport located along the Atlantic Coastal Flyway, the Hudson River Flyway, next to an estuary, you're always going to have some issues with birds. But you have to do what you can. They use propane cannons to scare them away. This little tree swallow was not impressed. He didn't realize in about 10 minutes he's going to go for a ride. Of course, the Concorde, all the environmentalists hated the Concorde. I kind of liked it. It was a great machine to watch come over your head at a couple of 100 feet and shake you from head to toe. So I got to be at the airport. I took the shot. I had to drop my camera and cut my ears. I probably would have burst an eardrum. But it was an incredible flying machine, but we know what happened to that. Cormorants are growing in numbers. Although the population declined recently, some other interesting things are happening. But in the 1980s, there were no cormorants in the Bay Area. We found a first nesting pair next to the Verrazano Bridge on Hoffman Island. Now they've taken over those two islands. They've come into the bay and started taking over some of the herony sites, which I'm not thrilled about. And they could pose a problem. But the cormorant population is kind of stable in the bay now. They kind of deserted one area because I think raccoons, the raccoons hammering the poor terrapins. They also, once they get on an island, all the ground nesting birds, the gulls, the oyster catchers, everybody leaves. And the Canada geese stay there. So I guess they can handle their own with a raccoon. But so the biggest island, the cormorants left, they're only on there. So there's really not a lot of them anymore, although they are a concern. Mute swans, a growing number of mute swans in one of the ponds. And for years when I worked for the Park Service, we would go in, we'd find the nest, we'd addle the eggs, we'd keep the population down. And when I left the Park Service about 9 years ago, everything went downhill. At least that's what I say. They no longer bothered to get out there and do a lot of the work. Any Park Service people here before? I become their greatest critic. The ospreys, we know they started making a comeback after one of our great environmental presidents, Richard Nixon, remember him? 1972, I think he banned DDT by executive order. 10 years later, populations that survived started to lay, eggs that didn't break, and they came back. And we were ready for them. We started building. I noticed as the population started to build up from east coming west toward the city, I said, they're going to start nesting in the bay. So we put up some poles, but they like what they like. And one of them, right on Cross Bay Boulevard, a heavily trafficked boulevard with buses going by. Every year now they're nesting there. And of course, the airport is not thrilled with the ospreys. They do sometimes take their fish and sit on the runways. And we now have 15 nesting pair. Last year we had 25 young. So ospreys are, I think, fully restored pretty much to this area. But they are majestic birds. I love them. We used to put those big flat platforms up there, 20 foot high. You had to climb up, risk your life on a ladder. And then I found them nesting on a piece of floating dock. And I, put two and two together. I said, why are we building these big things? They're going to nest low. So every platform we put up now is only about 5, 6 feet high. Beautiful young ospreys, just about 8 weeks old, just about to fledge. Really docile animal for such a big predatory bird. There's our tag. If you find any osprey that has a green tag, that's a Jamaica Bay bird. Of course, the peregrine falcons, another success story we talked about. Peregrines are now nesting in every bridge from the Verrazano clear up to Albany, and some of the cliffs from the Palisades now up by Mohawk, and also a lot of the buildings in the cities. So peregrines are doing quite well. That's Chris Nadareski, the tireless bander of all our birds. That's a young peregrine. He's a baby peregrine on the Marine Park Bridge overlooking Fort Tilden in the Rockaways. What a view, huh? That's where the birds nest, right up here. For the last 15 years, these are 3 old gun turrets on the south side of the Marine Park, or Gil Hodges Bridge, and that's where they're nesting. My favorite bird, kids will ask, what's your favorite bird? And I say, well, I love them all. I even like house sparrows. Is Peter here? I hope not. I like those house sparrows. And even starlings. They're pretty, and in the winter, their song, you hear them whistling. But when you press me, it's the barn owl, because as a kid, I caught a barn owl, and the thing was bigger than me. We had an expedition. When I was a kid growing up around in Queens near the Jamaica Bay, there was a lot more open space. I can tell you that in my whole neighborhood, there was a 100-acre truck farm, the big vacant lots. We were out every day from dawn till dusk, come back when the lights went on. And there isn't a square inch left of any open space. So, terrible planning. But the barn owls, we caught one in Old Incinerator. We've had it in my friend's garage. And we said, well, what do they eat? We didn't know. So we said, we got a little pigeon. So we got a small pigeon, put it in there. And, we're waiting for this, you know how kids are, bloodthirsty little creatures they are. And the pigeon walked over to the owl, and they kind of stood, looked at each other, and they kind of just hung out together. So, well, they don't eat pigeons. So what we found a small cat, medium-sized cat. This is going to be good. He's going to kill it and eat it, or there's going to be a great fight. Cat went in, cat stayed over, the owl stayed over there. So we let it go after a couple of days, and thankfully, so in my adult life, I'm making up for my bad behavior as a kid. So we put up these owl boxes everywhere. Lots of rodents around the waterfront, a lot of Norway, or as Peter said, the brown rats, and mice and meadow voles, things like that. Put up these boxes, and they take readily to them. They're a wonderful bird when we're holding them. They're a very sweet-looking bird. They actually sometimes fall asleep while they're waiting to be banded. At least they appear. Either that, or they realize their fate is sealed, and they just close their eyes. I don't want to look at this. But there's 3 little ones in a box. And you see how quickly, in a couple of years, these are all the remains of the rats and mice that they've been feeding on. So and the kids in school like to get all the pellets. So we freeze some of the pellets, bring them to school, and they dissect them and figure out what the prey is. We've done those studies in Jamaica Bay. Our owls eat almost entirely rats and mice, mostly meadow voles, some white-footed mice, which are growing in number, and rats. I saw a small rabbit once in one, but that's not uncommon. There they are in the box. Cute as can be. I like them. Another interesting project was the grasslands. And Mike, you're going to tell me what time it is. You're going to keep it. Tell me when it's 5 minutes. The grassland project was another Audubon, New York City Audubon and National Park Service, mostly Audubon requesting of the Park Service that we keep this old airfield at Floyd Bennett Field as grassland because of the vanishing grassland species. And so we cut out all the woody vegetation. We even had a controlled burn at one point. Actually, not controlled. They don't call them controlled burns anymore because a couple of them got out of control. So now it's prescribed burns. Everything in life is how you say it, isn't it? But anyway, so that was done. We never got the species. We never got the upland sandpipers. The grasshopper sparrows disappeared despite our best efforts and so on. So something else is happening. But we're keeping it as open grassland. The kestrels love it. In the spring and fall, you see them hovering over there looking for insects. The harriers love it. This is a kestrel that was working at the airport. Red-tailed hawks like it, and red-tailed hawks are on the increase everywhere. They're nesting in every borough of the city now. I see them on the sides of the highway, either on the light stanchions or even on the guardrail I saw one the other day, or the cars whizzing by 5 feet away from it. So given a chance, animals will adapt. One of the most interesting things we did was, we were park rangers, macho park rangers, but we didn't have any grizzly bears, So what do? Let's manage for butterflies. So we decided, no one's looking at butterflies and insects. So I did a survey of the national parks, national wildlife refuges. Very few of them knew much about butterflies or had anyone managing. So I said, well, let's try it, And we started a butterfly club with Rick, you're going to hear later, who's one of our experts. And we created diversity of habitats. You need wildflowers. You need the host plants for the caterpillars. You need a variety of habitats. So we kept managing for that, let the wildflowers grow, and, you build it, they'll come. The American copper, and, of course, the beautiful monarch. Loves all the goldenrods, especially in the fall. Then we got into moths. And Steve Walter, I don't know if he's here, but he's our local moth expert. So we went through all the macro moths, the pretty ones, nice ones. I dropped out when we started to get down to those little brown pinhead guys. I said, I'm a naturalist, but to a point. I have my limits. So we did a lot of the moths, the Io moths, and we found there's a great diversity of moths. In fact, moth species outnumber butterflies by almost 10 to 1. So they're a really important component of the whole ecology of the whole uplands and fields. And of course, one of our keynote species in Jamaica Bay is the horseshoe crab. Give me a horseshoe crab and I've got your attention. And I love to do horseshoe crab programs for kids. They just love it. And of course, the horseshoe crabs are laying their eggs and all the shorebirds are coming back, and in particular the red knot, which really is very heavily dependent on the horseshoe crabs laying their eggs. And the horseshoe crabs have to be in good numbers, not just a few here, a few there. Because every time they peck down, they're expending energy, so they really have to get more bang for their buck they actually double their weight in order to make it up to their northern breeding grounds. Their population, this race of the red knot, which actually comes from Brazil nonstop over here, and burns up all that body fat. We lost about 80%, 5 minutes. So he's got a card with 5 minutes, thank you. All right, I'm going to move quickly. We do... Jamaica Bay is known for its shorebirds. We manage the ponds, specifically the East Pond, drain the water, create a big mud flat, and we've been having annual shorebird festivals each year. These are yellowlegs. Some ruddy turnstones with the brant geese. A lot of photographers cut their teeth at the refuge. Some of the best bird photographers in the country started in Jamaica Bay. This is one of the big uplands. This is the Canarsie Pole, which is actually a fill site, but it's developing woodland with open space. So It adds a lot of diversity. It provides habitat for the egrets and herons, ibises, things that need islands. Although I think raccoons have now gotten to this island because last year I didn't find any ground nesting gulls there, so something's happened. But we've got good numbers of these birds. We had the first glossy ibises that nested in the Northeast. 1960 was written up in the papers. You know, a testament that we have this new refuge, or dedicated refuge. This species started to become numerous, then declined. You know what's happened to them? The cattle egret. They're still quite common down south, but up here, they just didn't make it. Maybe too much pesticide, because they're insectivorous for the most part, and they were following the tractors around and the airport. They're probably getting a lot of pesticide. The glossy ibis is, again, the species that everybody loves. When I worked at the visitor center desk, people would come in and say, what is that bird that looks like the Concorde or like a pterodactyl? I knew right away what they were going to ask. Some southern species, we're getting more species coming in. The little blues, the tricolors are starting to nest in the bay. Yellow-crowned night herons, the biggest colony in New York State, is in one of the worst crime-ridden housing projects in Far Rockaway. And I go there to do the survey. The police say, don't go in there. We don't even go in there. But the black-crowned night herons doing well, the green herons, of course the egrets, ibises. Yeah, I'm bigger than you, you know, that sort of thing. And my favorite little egret is Igor. One day I walked from my dock in the house and I felt like someone was looking at me. I turned around, there was an egret following me in the house. So he's been coming for years. Goes away in the winter. Last year, March 21st, shows up at my dock. And he'd come almost every day, disappear for a while, come again. So I had a little killie trap out and I would feed him. But I said, Igor, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I want some good photos. But Igor is a great, gentle egret. Would take it nice and gently out of your hand. And of course, my little ducks started to show up. All these animals just happened to come up there. And Peter, if you're here, I'm sorry, but I can't help. I do feed these things. You know, this is one of the islands off the Verrazano Bridge. We have two of them. The old, there were islands where the immigrants, any immigrant that had any problems, they quarantined them there. And but now they're major heronries and areas for cormorants, great black gulls. Here's a great black gull consuming a common tern. He ate this whole thing. I couldn't believe it. Just got it all down. But let's not forget about the fish. You know, it's an estuary. People forget about, you know, the birds. Of course, we've identified over 336 species of birds now, 71 or 72 species of butterflies, 100 species of finfish, down to 1 minute. I'll go through some, the bluefish and even things like mola, the ocean sunfish. This guy was, again, you know what happened to that. That's a boat propeller. The terrapin we heard about, the box turtles, we had an introduction program. So much happening in New York City, you wouldn't believe it. And I say to people, you'll see more kinds of wildlife in New York City than if you go up to the Catskills or Adirondacks. They're concentrated, whatever's here, and you got these major flyways. This is our one coyote for Brooklyn and Queens. Actually, this is in Queens, Breezy Point. Occasional whale comes up, sperm whale, seals we get. A lot of beautiful ground nesting birds nest all along areas where people are recreating, walking by. So they're learning, those that learn to live with us are the ones that are going to survive into the future. So I'll just run through them and kind of end off. It's a great, interesting story, Jamaica Bay. A lot's happening. I hope we can save it. We're spending a lot of time and effort into restoring the marshes, creating even freshwater wetlands, habitats like that. Look at those house sparrows. Housing shortage, New York City. And one of my favorite pictures. This is not a setup. I looked out my window, and it's an actual picture. And my little ducks. There they are, all waiting for me. One record of armadillo, American bittern, several records of white pelican. So we do get a lot of rarities as well, and great numbers of birds. Broad Channel, that's no longer there. My boat, my house, which had about this much water in it. My street, my house again, and a couple of sunsets. Thank you very much.